Okay then, on to part 2 of my Rise of Skywalker rewrite. I might as well find something to do as the world becomes a real-life retelling of the movie Outbreak. Picking up where we left off after Lando and Zori informed Finn, Poe and the others about Leia's imminent fate, back over on Starkiller Base, Kylo is training with the other Knights of Ren, but a little bit more intensely than normal. Kylo's jealousy of Rey and her apparent ease of tapping into the dark side has more than gotten to him a bit, so he's pushing himself as far as he possibly can in order to tap into that same energy. He even surrounds himself with some of his collected dark side artifacts as he tries to commune with the spirits that once owned them, but to no avail. This is when we start to see Kylo begin to unravel. Since Force Awakens, we have seen that this guy is not emotionally stable. Not only that, but he's also desperately seeking approval, power, and recognition from the people around him. Even his proclamations of forging his own empire in the form of the First Order is only a result of his need to be recognized as strong by others. He wants to be as strong as Darth Vader, as strong as the Emperor, and now here comes Rey, someone that he only brought to his side in order to further his own agenda, and she's already surpassed him by communing with the ancient Sith spirits. He keeps up his training, delving as far into the dark side as he can, and almost kills one of the other Knights of Ren in the process. His friends try to calm him down and pull him back from the brink, but Kylo storms off, completely consumed by his rage. He marches out into the cold, snowy landscape of Starkiller Base and yells out, demanding that the ancient Sith speak to him, but they don't. They remain silent. Meanwhile, Rey is having a bit better luck in that department, even though she really wishes that she wasn't. She meditates in front of Darth Vader's helmet and the dagger that she unearthed on Onderon and begins to hear the voices again. But instead of simply letting them speak and shout at her, she focuses, trying to push her way through them and hone her abilities. Then, after breaking through the dark veil, she comes to the voice that she was looking for all this time, Luke. They share a proper conversation for the first time since Last Jedi. She says how scared she is, how she doesn't know what to do, or how she should use her newfound powers, and Luke reassures her that that uncertainty is actually a good thing. The dark side calls to everyone who uses the Force, including him and including her, but she hasn't given into it yet because that's just not the kind of person she is. Whether she meant to do it or not, she has developed her own sense of right and wrong, totally independent of the Jedi or the Sith. Luke admits that he only taught her as much as he was ready to teach her in the last film, and now is her chance to learn something new and grow from it, even if it means tapping into the dark side a little bit. Kylo's philosophy of forging one's own path and one's own destiny isn't entirely wrong, but someone like him is too emotionally unstable and power-hungry to see its fruition. Someone like Rey, though, someone who doesn't hunger for power and glory the way Kylo does, she stands a better chance of creating something great from the ashes that the First Order has left of the galaxy. But then their conversation is cut short by a new voice which cuts through the gloom, a voice that we faintly recognize. At first we don't see who it is, but as Rey turns and Luke vanishes, we see none other than the ghost of Emperor Palpatine himself, laughing his evil little laugh. Rey quickly snaps out of the vision, unsure about what it means, and after a few months' consideration, she begins to figure it out. She storms out of her room and runs into Kylo Ren and calls him out on his ultimate plan. He's not actually looking for random Sith and Jedi artifacts for the sake of just keeping them out of the wrong hands. She's looking for any artifacts throughout the galaxy which might have belonged to Darth Sidious, the most powerful Sith Lord in history. Their visits to various planets, the latest being Onderon, was simply them searching all the prominent planets that Sidious traveled to during his reign, where he might have left something strong in the dark side. Kylo believes that by finding any dark side artifacts relating to the Emperor, he will come that step closer to being the undisputed greatest Force user in the galaxy. He tries to reason with Rey, saying that there's nothing to suggest that they can't rule the galaxy together using Sidious's power, but enraged by his deception, Rey force pushes Kylo back and flees Starkiller Base. Over with the Resistance, Finn and Poe and the others follow Zori and Lando to the Republic's stronghold on the planet of Felucia. As soon as they land, Poe goes to see Leia, who, yes, is sadly now on her deathbed. They comfort her, hold her hand, inform her of the situation, and she smiles, sure in the knowledge that the rebellion will succeed in their mission. They all seem a bit perplexed by her optimism, but that's only because they can't see what she can. Luke's ghost appears before her, invisible to the others, and holds her hand as she begins to pass away. They share a private little conversation about what's to come next, and Luke admits that he can only foresee so much. He hopes that Rey will make the right choice, but Leia reassures him that no matter what choice she makes, it has to be hers. Not Luke's, not Kylo's, hers. As a final question, Leia asks Luke if Han is with him, but we cut away from that before we can hear his response. Meanwhile, Finn introduces the turncoat stormtrooper, the newly named Dan, to the Resistance. At first, of course, they're a little bit hostile, but Finn reminds them that he too was once a stormtrooper, just like him, and that if they're going to kill the boy, they may as well kill him too. They lower their weapons and begin their latest strategy meeting. While the galaxy is still terrified of the First Order and the Supreme Leaders, Poe points out the fatal flaw in the bad guys' plan. Starkiller Base is their largest bargaining chip. They haven't had enough time to really spread their tendrils out to every corner of the galaxy, and with the help of the criminal syndicates which Lando and Zori helped rally, support for the Resistance has begun to slowly grow. Take away the big ball of flaming death, and the rest of the First Order is sure to crumble. But then Dan steps forward, stating that there is no realistic way of destroying the whole of Starkiller Base, as it is simply too massive. The only hope they have is to find a way to shut down the main cannon itself. The Resistance leaders expect them to go on, but he refuses to give away any tactical information about Starkiller Base unless they promise to spare as many lives as possible, including First Order soldiers. The Resistance leaders scoff at first, but Finn comes to his new friend's defense, saying that he and Dan are proof that anyone is capable of changing their ways, even stormtroopers, and that they owe it to Leia and the principles of the now destroyed Republic to at least try. One by one, the Resistance leaders reluctantly agree, and Dan begins to go over the structural weaknesses of Starkiller Base. Meanwhile, as Rey pilots her stolen ship, she finds herself hearing the voice of Darth Sidious in her head once again. Although his body was destroyed, his spirit lingered in the galaxy, tethered to the dark side itself, waiting for the right moment to return and re-energize his empire. See, in my opinion, bringing the Emperor back in the Rise of Skywalker wasn't inherently an awful idea, as long as he wasn't back, like physically still around. The notion of Sith spirits lingering around the galaxy causing trouble has been well established in other Star Wars materials, so bringing him back in incorporeal form as like the devil on Rey's shoulder, that kind of makes a bit more sense to me. And no, he's not Rey's granddad in this version, just getting that out of the way. Cutting back to it, Sidious tells Rey that Luke was right. She has the potential to be the greatest Force user in the galaxy, not Kylo, who is too blinded by his insecurity to properly seize his destiny. He informs Rey that he did in fact leave an artifact on his homeworld of Naboo and implores her to go and find it. Rey's now feeling more than a bit conflicted. On the one hand, she knows taking this artifact would be a great risk and a very Sith-like thing to do. On the other hand, she can't go to the Republic without them killing her, or back to the First Order without them imprisoning her. So she's ultimately stuck with the path of least resistance. But Sidious also voices another reason for her to listen to him. Kylo Ren, the First Order, just how much of her life has been upended by these bastards. Her homeworld attacked, her sister killed, being forced to turn on her own friends. Wouldn't she like the power to get back at the First Order for everything that they've done and prevent them from doing it to anyone else? Though she won't say it, we can see that she's more than a little tempted by the prospect. Meanwhile, the rebels are gearing up for their big showdown with the First Order. According to the recently redeemed Stormtrooper, their only hope of shutting down Starkiller Base's big weapon is to destroy the central generator, something which cannot be completed from shuttlecraft as it sits right in the bowels of the planet. The only way to destroy it is if someone goes inside to do it remotely, and realistically there's only two people who can pull it off, the two former Stormtroopers. Of course, it won't be enough for them to just sneak in without the risk of raising an alarm. They need a convincing distraction to keep the First Order occupied, and the only one that would possibly work would be if they believed that they had the rebellion at their mercy. Then there's the issue of making sure that Starkiller Base's cannon doesn't fire during the mission. The one silver lining that the rebels have in this whole situation is that it requires hours to recharge between uses, and it's at this point that Leia, despite being weak and close to death, proposes a solution. They let the First Order know where the rebels are. She then stays behind on the planet of Felucia while the rest of the rebellion jump into hyperspace. Dan then goes to Starkiller Base dressed as a stormtrooper with the traitorous FN-2187 in tow to report the location of the rebels' hidden base. The First Order then turns Starkiller Base's cannon on the planet and open fire, destroying it and Leia in the process. Leia is suggesting sacrificing herself for the good Lord of the Rebellion. That sounds very much in her character. Of course, this gets a few protestations from her fellows, but she makes it clear that the First Order need a credible reason to believe that the rebels are on Felucia, and the only way that they can do that, other than have the whole of the rebels remain and get blown to bits, is if Leia uses the Force to commune with Kylo from the surface of the world. That will be the clinching proof that he needs. With him knowing that she's there, he will also assume that the rebels are there with her, and he can either fire the weapon, taking away the First Order's greatest asset and giving the rebels the chance to attack, or he could chicken out and send his troops to Felucia to bring her and the supposed rebels in alive. Either way, Starkiller Base is left open to an attack by the rebellion from hyperspace. It's the best chance that the rebels have to win this fight. Reluctantly and with a great sense of sorrow, the rebels agree to the plan. A few volunteer to stay behind so that Leia doesn't have to die alone, but she reassures them by saying that she won't actually be alone. And we of course know who's going to be standing by her side. Meanwhile, Rey sets a course for Naboo and arrives to find the planet in pretty bad shape. Turns out after Palpatine's death, the planet suffered significant financial turmoil because of their support for the Emperor's rule. I mean, the idea of a native to your planet being in charge of the entire galaxy must have appealed to them quite a bit. The downside to that is that once Palpatine was overthrown and the New Republic took over, very few of the other planets wanted anything to do with the dead Emperor's greatest supporters. No one traded with them, no one did business with them, and the planet soon fell into economic ruin as a result. When Rey touches down in the capital city, she finds much of it deserted or on the verge of destruction. Heeding instructions from Palpatine's spirits, she makes her way to the central palace to find an artifact left behind by the dead Emperor, one which even Kylo Ren couldn't find. Sure enough, in a hidden compartment in the central throne room, she finds none other than Palpatine's lightsaber, still strong with dark side energy. Rey falls into a meditation and uses the Force to dismantle his lightsaber and her own, essentially taking different elements from both to combine them into something stronger. Finally, she brings the ensemble together and ignites her own double-bladed lightsaber. Palpatine congratulates her on her intuition and she sets off back to her ship, confident in her new mission. Rey is now closer to the dark side than she has ever been before. Over with Kylo Ren, we see him begin to enter the final stages of his madness. He barks at the Dark Council and the other Knights of Ren, he screams at himself in the mirror, he imagines the visages of Darth Vader or the Emperor appearing before him, but he isn't even sure if it's in his head or if they are actual visitations from the dead Sith themselves. His associates don't have time to comment on his slip of sanity, however, as a ship comes to land on Starkiller Base carrying DN-3698 and the former stormtrooper FN-2187. DN explains about his heroic fight against the rebels and his daring escape from their base on Felucia. He insists on taking this treacherous dog to the cells himself, but Captain Phasma insists on accompanying them, leaving the Dark Council and the Knights of Ren to debate tactics on dealing with the rebels. But while they're having their little argument, Kylo hears the voice of his mother in his head. He assumes that Leia is going to try and talk him out of what he's doing, but she surprisingly says no. He has had every chance imaginable to give up this path he's chosen and come back to the light side, and as much as it pains her to admit it, by this point she knows there's nothing she can do to convince him to stop. He's beyond the pale. This is just her last chance to say goodbye to her son. Enraged by his mother's loss of faith in him, Kylo commands his forces to prepare Starkiller Base's cannon to fire on Felucia. Meanwhile, Finn waits for Dan to leap into action and stop Phasma from chucking him into a cell, but the redeemed stormtrooper is surprisingly slow to action. As we see from his shaking hands, the poor boy is far too traumatized by his training under Phasma to react against her. They all enter the holding area and Phasma commands to see a status report on the chip in DN-3698's head, which of course was deactivated by the rebels. The whole job is about to be blown sky high, but while this is going on, Kylo stands in the Starkiller Base control room as the cannon is primed and ready to fire. He has his hand over the button ready to activate the weapon that's going to kill his mother and destroy an entire world, and then he hears Leia's voice once again. She doesn't tell him to stop, she simply states that she is at peace with this whole situation and that in spite of everything he's done and everything he may continue to do, she will always love him as her son. Tears streaming down his face, Kylo's hand moves away from the fire button and he commands his fleet to mobilize and go to Felucia to bring the rebels in alive. alive, much to the confusion and concern of his comrades in the Knights of Ren. One kind of scary scene I thought would be to have one of the knights audibly question Kylo's stability and even suggest that he take some rest while they handle the situation, to which Kylo responds by letting loose some of his pent-up rage and cut the knight to bits. Cutting back to the holding cells, Phasma commands Dan again to submit to a full checkup of his psychological implant, and the boy begins to freeze up, utterly terrified and unsure of what to do. Then, just as Finn is about to get chucked into a cell, he breaks the fake handcuffs that he has on and takes Dan's blaster out of his hands. They duck and cover, matching laser fire with Phasma and the surrounding troopers and triggering an alarm throughout the entire base. Kylo hears it and sees camera footage of Finn and Dan engaged in a shootout with Phasma. See how Leia has manipulated him for the sake of the rebel cause. The Supreme Leader feels his old anger return to him and, in a blind fit of rage, slams his hand down on the fire button. Starkiller Base's cannon shoots its deadly beam right across space, heading towards Felucia. Leia ultimately accepts her fate and closes her eyes. The rest of the rebels have successfully evacuated the planet, only she remains, and all that's left to do is await the inevitable. Then, just as the laser comes in sight of Felucia, Leia feels two familiar hands in her own. The spirits of Luke and Han come back to be with her in her dying moments. They don't share a word, they don't say anything, they simply embrace one another as Starkiller Base's cannon destroys the entire planet. The rebels see the destruction of Felucia on their ships and, though grieving Leia's loss, drop out of hyperspace to initiate their surprise attack on Starkiller Base. Taken completely off guard, Kylo commands his forces to engage them in the air. Meanwhile, in the lower levels of the base, the two renegade stormtroopers manage to flee the area with minimal damage and begin to make their way to the cannon's main generator, with Phasma hot on their tails. To avoid surveillance, they make use of the ventilation shafts in the base to continue their journey, and on the way, Dan apologizes for freezing up the way he did when confronted with his former commander. Finn reassures him by saying that he's gone through the exact same thing, and though he did have a moment of panic where he thought Dan was going to give the whole thing up, he held out faith that his friend wasn't going to stab him in the back. They make their way to their destination, successfully break into the generator room, and hold the men and women operating the cannon at gunpoint. But then, just as they're getting ready to take the whole thing down, they get interrupted by Captain Phasma. Cutting away from that dramatic development for a minute, we see Rey dropping out of hyperspace as the rebels and the First Order engage in their big space battle. We see her take her ship into land on Starkiller Base, the stormtroopers come out to greet their Supreme Leader, only for Rey to stroll right past them, plainly set on some kind of a mission. Sure enough, she goes to meet Kylo in his throne room as he and the Knights of Ren, who aren't in the air engaging the rebels, oversee the entire battle. This is the point that Rey sees just how far into madness that Kylo has fallen. She reveals that she felt Leia's death through the Force and makes it clear that she's come with an ultimatum. Either Kylo can stand down as Supreme Leader or she will destroy him. At this point, we can't actually be sure of Rey's intentions. Does she want to rule the First Order alone, or does she want to tear the whole thing down? Even Kylo is confused by Rey's demand, but as he sees Palpatine's spirit cackling behind her, he makes the assumption that she has come to take Kylo's throne away from him. Summoning his fury, he and the other Knights of Ren ignite their lightsabers, Rey ignites hers, and they have themselves a duel in the middle of the Supreme Leader's throne room. And yes, for all of you prequels fans out there, the choreography here would be more akin to something like Phantom Menace, not the boring stuff we got in Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker. Then, as they're having their battle, Finn and Dan engage with Phasma and her troopers down in Starkiller Base's generator room. It could start out as a straightforward firefight, and then Dan and Finn take out the shooters, leaving only Phasma left, but thanks to her laser-resistant armor, they can't take her down with blasters and are forced to engage her in close-quarters combat. This would make for a pretty good mix of fights in the climax of the film. You have a group battle with Rey versus Kylo Ren and a few of the Knights of Ren in the throne room, a three-way fight between Finn and Dan versus Phasma, and the big space battle above, with Poe, Zori, and Lando captaining the Rebel fleet in their battle against the First Order. Speaking of which, Poe and Zori pilot their ships through the onslaught and manage to infiltrate the inner workings of the base, and this provides another aspect of the final battle. Poe, Zori, and the other rebels moving their way through Starkiller Starkiller Base, taking down enemies left and right on their way to secure the planet. True to his word though, Poe insists on killing as few stormtroopers as possible. You could maybe have a moment where a few of the stormtroopers are injured, but they're not dead, they're just out of the fight, and a rebel soldier goes in to finish them off, but Poe stops him, reminding the soldiers that they aren't the same butchers as their enemies. They have to try and be better. They gave their word. Meanwhile, the battle plays out below, with Finn and Dan holding their own against Phasma as best as they can. Unfortunately, through some fairly unsportsmanlike tactics, Phasma successfully cuts off Finn's hand, the same one that he took from her in the last film. Dan comes in to save his comrade and the battle continues. Thankfully, just as the fight is reaching its crescendo, Poe comes in and distracts Phasma long enough to give Finn and Dan the chance to stab Phasma in the leg and take her down. The rebels then put handcuffs on Captain Phasma, destroy the generator room, rendering the cannon inactive, and proceed to spread throughout the base, with Finn, Poe, Dan and Zori making their way to the main command center. Meanwhile, as all of this is going on, Rey, Kylo and the Knights of Ren continue their fight in the throne room. Kylo's fighting with all of the mad fury of someone clearly enthralled to the dark side. He has passed beyond the point of no return. He's just desperate to kill Rey and prove himself as the superior, such to the point that he's even force pushing his own allies out of the way just to take her on directly. Rey is also tapping into the dark side a bit more than what we've seen in the past, but it's clear that she is more in control than Kylo Ren is. Both combatants are strong, but Rey's focus is serving her better than Kylo's blind fury. And because of the lack of cohesion between Kylo and his fellow knights, Rey's focus is that much more of an asset. Maybe at one point in the fight, Rey even uses a bit of cunning to redirect Kylo's lightsaber right into one of the other knights, killing him. At one point, Rey makes use of a very dark side tactic and actually begins to mock Kylo at the height of their battle. Guess it's a bit late for you to go running home to Mummy now you've killed her. Kylo, of course, isn't having any of it and force pushes her right through the throne room's window out into the snowy plains of Starkiller Base. They continue their fight, now just one-on-one, as the space battle rages above, eventually coming to the barrel of Starkiller's cannon. The battle keeps going, with neither side giving ground. Then, in a sudden show of cunning, Kylo slices Rey's double-bladed lightsaber in half and force pushes her back and stabs her in the shoulder, pinning her to the ground. Then, as it looks like he's won, the spirit of Palpatine appears before them both, and he congratulates Kylo on his victory, stating that this was his final test to prove himself as the true supreme leader of the Force. Yeah, Palpatine's just completely turned on Rey the instant it looked like she was going to lose. Go figure.
Pull your knife out of my back.
As Kylo rejoices, finally gaining the acceptance and validation that he's always wanted, Rey feels a surge of rage erupt through her, and she uses the Force to, quite painfully, pull Kylo's lightsaber out of her shoulder and push her opponent back. She then gets to her feet, forces one end of her split lightsaber into her hand, and the battle ensues once again. Furious at having his victory taken from him, Kylo backs Rey up against the edge of the massive cannon, threatening to plunge her in, and then, in a very unfair tactic, Rey uses the Force to bring Luke's old lightsaber, which was concealed on her belt, up towards her hand. She then redirects Kylo's lightsaber far enough away to give her a clear line of sight to grab Luke's lightsaber and slice Kylo's hand clean off. As his dismembered limb and crossguard lightsaber disappear down Starkiller Base's cannon, Kylo falls to the snow, utterly defeated. Rey stands over her opponent, red lightsaber in one hand and Luke's green lightsaber in the other, as Palpatine begins to speak again. Suddenly, he's back on her side. How convenient. He urges her to kill Kylo and take her new place as the sole supreme leader of the galaxy, and sure enough, Rey actually begins to choke Kylo Ren with the Force, just as Sidious's ghost cackles in the background. Then, as she comes closer and closer to killing him, she hears familiar voices across the snow, and she looks up to see Finn, Poe, and the others running towards them. With the memory of her friends pulling her back from the dark side, Rey stops choking Kylo Ren, much to the chagrin of the Emperor. Palpatine berates her, saying that neither she nor Kylo is worthy of the power that he once had, and Rey responds quite darkly that she doesn't need it. She turns around and shoots a sudden barrage of Sith lightning at the ghost, causing him to scream out in pain and agony. Kylo watches in shock and horror as Rey uses the dark side to essentially destroy Palpatine's essence, which is far, far worse than just killing him. Finn, Poe, and the others come over a ridge to watch the spectacle spectacle unfold, and though they can't see Palpatine's ghost, they can see the kind of power that Rey is tapping into here. Finally, Rey succeeds and Palpatine's spirit fades away, completely obliterated. "The Emperor will never again plague the galaxy, and neither will you," she says, turning to Kylo. He asks, confused, why she doesn't just kill him, and she responds quite simply, what's the point? He's beaten. The First Order are defeated. Killing him would just be one more death on her conscience, and even in spite of everything he's done, it's also the last thing that Leia would have wanted. And with that, she beckons Finn, Poe, and the others to join her and take the deposed Supreme Leader in alive. The day is won, Starkiller Base's cannon has now been successfully deactivated and will never be used again, and the First Order has now well and truly fallen. We could see some planets across the galaxy celebrating like at the end of Return of the Jedi. The rebels cheer their victory, Kylo Ren and the few surviving Knights of Ren are taken away in chains to face justice. As the rebels celebrate, however, Rey stands alone in Starkiller Base's throne room, looking over the pieces of her lightsaber along with Luke's. She wonders if what she did to Palpatine was the right thing, as Luke's ghost suddenly appears to her. To her combined dismay and relief, he doesn't actually give her a definitive answer to her question. While she did defeat Kylo Ren and helped bring down the First Order, she did embrace the dark side. She didn't hold anything back, and she has now done something even more extreme than take a life. She destroyed a soul. Ultimately, she's gonna have to live with what she's done, both good and bad. But at the end of the day, she followed her own path. Not the Sith's, not the Jedi's, hers. And that's the most important thing. Smiling at his words, Rey thanks Luke for all of his teachings and watches his ghost depart with Leia and Han and sheds a single tear, happy that they are now at peace together. The moment is cut short, however, as Finn and Poe enter the room. They confirm that the whole base is under their control, and now that the First Order is gone, they can get started on the long road of fixing the broken galaxy. Finn asks Rey what she's going to be doing, and she responds by saying, quite sadly, that she's just going to have to disappear now, just take a ship out into the cosmos and drop off of everybody's radar. Finn seems confused and hurt by her decision, but Poe understands her reasoning. Rey was still the joint Supreme Leader with Kylo Ren. Though she helped take down the First Order in the end, she still helped oversee the suppression of the galaxy under the regime's heel. More than a few people are gonna want to see her punished. They then discreetly make their way out of the base towards the Millennium Falcon that's waiting in the snow along with Lando, Zori, Chewbacca, C-3PO, R2-D2, and BB-8. They share a bittersweet goodbye with Lando giving her permission to take the Falcon and leave the planet undetected. Rey shares a final embrace with Finn and Poe and leaves the planet in the Millennium Falcon. The others then discuss what they're gonna do next, and Poe responds by saying, we're gonna put the galaxy back together. Though the work will be hard, there's still a galaxy out there that needs to be rebuilt. For the final shot of the movie, I would have Rey sitting in the Falcon's cockpit looking over her destroyed lightsaber. Using the Force, she takes it apart and replaces the red crystal inside with the blue crystal that she found during her training with Luke. She puts the whole thing together, happy that it is now finally well and truly her lightsaber and nobody else's, and takes off into hyperspace, into the unknown, and boom! Cut to credits. And that concludes my incredibly long rewrite of the new Star Wars trilogy. Needless to say, I've had more than enough time to work on it, with the apocalypse cancelling any and all college classes, so that's good. So what did you all think of my rewrite? Were there any more changes that you would want to suggest to the new trilogy? Any avenues you think the story could have gone that I didn't suggest here? Whatever your thoughts are, leave them in the comments below, hit the like button, subscribe, thanks again for watching, and I will see you in the next video.